But what I think that we are under the impression that what we're seeing is affirmative action, which we were told 50 years ago when it started was a way to enfranchise people who'd been historically disadvantaged. I don't think that's a terrible idea, like as an idea.
It all seems so obvious, but it's only obvious to those who have the ability to see past good vibes and good intentions. When you seek to bypass reason, you use the appeal to emotion, and you must manipulate language to signal your good intentions. The truth of the matter is, there will be consequences when you appeal to emotions or appeal to reason. There are no free lunches. The big difference being, when you appeal to reason, the consequences are more transparent. And in a moment, we will see how a certain community fully embraced the language of emotion, and they are now swimming in murky and opaque consequences. Let's hear Peter Boghossian explain how the term inclusion is used by bad actors as a means for drowning their rivals.
The word inclusion has several meanings, and many of these are not just positive, but indispensable for civil society. Basically, inclusion can be distilled into the synonym welcoming. So an inclusive environment is one that is welcoming. And who wouldn't want to create a welcoming environment, particularly when it comes to welcoming people with different immutable characteristics, like race or disability status or sexual orientation? Every sane, decent person should want to create inclusive, welcoming environments. In practice, however, inclusion means something quite different. Inclusion means restricted speech. So an inclusive space is one that restricts speech so that its members feel welcome. An inclusive space must restrict speech, or some members would not feel welcome, and thus the space would not be inclusive. Typically, morally unfashionable ideas are restricted, and in the current moral zeitgeist, these revolve around things like race and gender or identity. Participants cannot say anything that hurt anybody's feelings or even potentially hurt someone's feelings or potentially make them feel unwelcomed. Like, what role does biology play in influencing life choices? The deeper point here is that inclusion is another attempt to deter pareidolia and thus prevent people from hearing forthright speech and having to contend with its contents. It's a way to restrict cognitive liberty. How could you engage in ideas honestly with the ever-looming possibility that people could be offended by your forthright speech, or even by a misused word? You cannot. We always feel like we're walking on eggshells. Inclusion is pareidolia's enemy. It makes us afraid to speak honestly, clearly, and directly. It makes us afraid to say what we mean, fearful of hurting others' feelings, and afraid not to offend, lest our speech be deemed responsible for creating an environment that's not inclusive. Because of inclusion, we all have to struggle to figure out what other people mean. And we have to do that because people don't say what they mean. And we have to figure out what we mean because we're afraid to say what we mean. We're afraid to speak honestly and directly. And it's by saying what you mean that we can actually figure things out. It's through pareidolia. That's the solution to this. If you don't buy into the dominant moral orthodoxy, inclusion forces you to lie. It prevents pareidolia. And it is not possible to have healthy relationships that are based on deceit. You shouldn't have to struggle to figure out what anybody else means. And you shouldn't have to struggle to figure out what you mean. Inclusive spaces cause you to use people and get used by people because nobody will be forthright for fear of losing speech rights, which ironically, they've already given up.
Wrapping up your bias and bigotry using flowery terms like inclusion and tolerance is very effective when your goal is to use emotional people as the pawns in your moral crusade. We can see this playing out today in the middle of 2023 amongst the lesbian community, specifically regarding lesbian bars. This next clip from a year ago shows a woman stuck between the rock of her sexuality and a hard place of tolerant language.
Forgive me, because I will hold my hands up to this. I do find this whole thing quite confusing at times, but I think it's because it is. And frankly, for me, just full disclosure, where I'm at, I don't understand where the feminism is in this. I don't understand how we've managed to get to a situation as a society where someone like me can tell someone like you what it means to be a woman and who you should be attracted to. And I just literally don't understand that. Do you feel as though now that your sexual preference is essentially being used as I don't know, discrimination in some way?
Absolutely, absolutely. First of all, I want to say this because women understand what is going on with lesbians, and a lot of men have your response where it's like, it's a bit confusing. You know, if you're a straight man and you date a person that you think is attractive, suddenly you get in bed, that person has a penis, you might be a little bit confused, you might be a little bit challenged, you might not be happy. For lesbians, when this happens, it's a rape scenario. And this is what happens in real life. So absolutely, what happened yesterday with the release of this BBC piece, which was long overdue, and I'm very grateful that it's out, is that, well, organizations like Stonewall, but also prominent trans activists have been, again, reinforcing the idea that if we as a group exclude sexually other groups, then we are just as bad as racist. I mean, this is sexual orientation is about exclusivity. You would never say to a straight man, you know, you're actually being bigoted because you don't want to sleep with other men. Why is this courtesy? Why is this right not given to lesbians? I do not know. What do you think?
As you can see, lesbians were all for inclusion and tolerance when they wedged themselves into the mainstream social fabric. But now they are not fond of the trans community using that same language to wedge themselves into lesbian spaces. In the second clip, we see the same battle raging on in a Portland lesbian bar.
10 months ago, I made a video about a bunch of activists being upset that a lesbian bar wasn't inclusive enough for everybody else in the LGBTQ community, and they demanded ownership of the store within 24 hours of a deadline, and you'll be shocked to know they didn't get it.
So everyone wants the tea on the ongoing issues with Doc Marie's, the new lesbian bar that just opened in Portland, and so I'm here to give it to you. I already made a short video about this, but after some more research as well as some helpful comments, thank you, I was able to piece together a little bit more what happened, and I'm going to share it with you all. So the employees of Doc Marie's have made a workers collective, and they have put out several statements on Instagram, the Instagram that this comment is referencing. And so I'm just going to transmit that information to TikTok. I encourage you all to go check out their Instagram and read it for yourself. But here's what Doc Marie's has been accused of doing. So there are a significant number of concerns this workers collective has made. In a nutshell, just repeated unprofessional and unsafe behavior that has put the physical safety of workers and customers at risk, payroll systems that are not paying people correctly, discrepancies in salaries, dirty water leaking onto the floor, and the owner enabling racist behavior. So the real reason why Doc Marie's is closed is because when the workers brought these concerns to the ownership the next day after opening day, the ownership did not meet the concerns with any sort of plan of action, and the unsatisfactory response caused the managers to quit their jobs immediately. The Workers Collective goes on to assure us that protecting Black and Brown LGBTQ plus folks in building an actively anti-racist space is their top priority, that they are committed to ongoing racial bias training and will continue to educate ourselves in order to actively foster a safe environment while upholding a zero policy towards racism. Again, there's way more details on Instagram, so I encourage everyone to check them out on Instagram and read it for yourself. Personally, I had close friends and community members who I saw openly ask the ownership of Doc Marie's what they were doing to be proactive about the safety, the health and safety of QT BIPOC people in particular, and their questions were met with silence and never addressed. There was also this piece of art on the wall, which is not inherently damning, but kind of so. And I'm not pointing all of this out to like just be a hater. Like I, like every other sapphic in Portland, yearn for a lesbian bar that actually meets the community's needs and centers Black and brown people and centers trans people and centers the health and safety of like disabled folks. I yearn for that. I want that so bad. And so I think I am willing to be critical, and I hope the whole entire community is willing to be critical of this space to make it exactly what we want and need, and not some bullshit white supremacist.
And I would sit here and pretend to be amazed by all of that, but I'm not, because when a bunch of people are pretending to be upset about something and they want something done, they're going to do the stupidest things possible. And
Truth is always the first casualty of war, as we see how bad actors have now added accusations of racism in order to create more confusion. It seems logical that lesbians would like to switch to the language of reason. While they can do that and win the battle, they have lost the war. They are inconvenient pawns that must be told to be quiet and erase your identity, in the name of inclusion and tolerance, of course. When trying to analyze or solve problems, what language do you prefer? The language of reason or that of emotion? If you like this video, please hit the like button or comment below and stay dangerous.